think because I've come from an RPO background and worked in consultancy for a large part of my career, I very much see TA as providing a service, so a great experience to the hiring leaders and candidates.
You do learn the most from your failures, and you don't grow unless you're kind of taking chances and doing something different.
Again, you might have a traditional way of recruiting in the business, the normal skills in the normal locations, and you might think, well, that works and that you can just lift and shift that to another location. But what I've found is that you often can't.
Hello, Elaine, and welcome to the Power of People Building podcast. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Sam.
It's wonderful to see you, although we get to see each other very frequently, which I'm very fortunate of, and you're very unfortunate. But for people that don't know you, it'd be great to get just an introduction to who you are and what you do.
Yes, so my name is Elaine Atkinson. I'm the Global Head of Talent Acquisition at Kainos. We are global experts in helping companies with digital transformation, and we're a Workday implementation and support partner. I've been in talent acquisition for over 20 years, actually started in exec search, moved into RPO, and then in the latter part of my career I've been in-house. And I also have a side hustle where I'm a leadership and a career transition coach as well, as part of my own business in Wonder Coaching.
A matrix career and a kind of patchwork setup at the moment. And I think the kind of where we had first met was a number of years ago when you were at Deloitte, and then obviously subsequently moved to Kainos, and we've been working a lot closer together there. Tell me about that transition. What does that look like? Obviously a huge global brand to a very fast growing, high performing organization. Like how has that been?
Yeah, I think through the majority of my career, I typically worked in larger organizations, and that's great in a sense because you really get to cut your teeth in big organizations that are large, complex, matrixed. Typically the TA functions though are bigger, the budgets are bigger, there's a lot of specialist roles in talent acquisition. So I certainly learned a lot, but transitioning to Kainos, which is a smaller organization, there's definitely similarities around the challenges within talent acquisition, but certainly you get the opportunity at times to be a bit more nimble and agile. Things move very quickly because when I joined, we were definitely scaling for growth. You've got to be a little bit more hands-on, more of a generalist from a TA perspective, but I quite enjoyed that, and more access to the executive and the senior leaders in the organization. So you really get to understand their drivers and you can tailor them what you're doing to that. And you're getting that frequent and constant feedback. So it's been good for me, and it was definitely an intentional choice to move to a smaller organisation.
And what was the driver then? Like you say, it was an intentional choice. What was the driver, the main driver to do that?
I did want to work in a company at the time that was more tech focused, because in the market that was the areas that were growing, and I really liked the idea of taking something that maybe wasn't as evolved, that didn't have all of the infrastructure in place, and putting it in place, so solving those problems again, getting my hands dirty. And as I said, I think the appeal was working for an organisation where I could get closer to the business, the execs, see the impact of what talent acquisition is doing, because sometimes in a larger company, the more senior you can get further away from seeing those outcomes. So that was really the main driver. And also for me, working in a culture that was transparent, collaborative, working with a great people leader, those things were still really important, in addition to the sort of company and the industry I was looking for.
Yeah, awesome. And I think we'll definitely come to like commercial impact and being able to be tied a lot closer to it. That's like the running theme that I'll talk to anybody until I'm blue in the face about. And, obviously we've spoken about at length before. I suppose like when you're looking at, for other people looking to make this kind of switch, right, from a big organization where, maybe their impact is a little bit diluted, harder to ascertain, exactly the role in which they're playing, to an organization that is people first, people are the revenue generator, and your impact is incredibly measurable and kind of tied to a business objective. Like, what would be your advice for people making that switch who are maybe looking from a bigger org to a smaller org?
I would say, first of all, my big learning, and this was intentional, was to be curious. So just because I'd been in a big organisation and I thought I knew what good looked like. I think you've got to meet an organisation where they are and understand the journey that they've been on and respect that journey. So certainly for the first month or longer, I spent time meeting all of the stakeholders, getting really curious about what got them to where they are now and what would take them to the next level as a business, and then translating that into what did that mean for talent acquisition. So certainly be really curious, take the time to take a step back and ask those questions. I did certainly look at identifying some quick wins. So where were the things that I felt I could make an immediate impact? Because that helps you build credibility quickly. And then really getting to know the team, because I don't think my whole career I've been successful because of the teams that I've led, whether they're 5 people or 150 people. So really getting a sense of, well, what is the business? Where do they want to go? What do we need to do? And what's the capacity and the capability in the team? And so very quickly I went about looking at where I needed to close those gaps, upskill people and move people into the right role to then basically hire quickly. So that was my mandate in year 1. They were really in growth mode. How do I bring good people in quickly? So I would say those are the things to do, but really just slow down and take a step back, the quick wins, and then start to formulate what you need to do, but starting with the people.
Yeah, awesome. And I think, starting with the people and also building that internal credibility, like let's dive down into that. Like what do you think makes a talent acquisition team credible when you talk about quick wins? What's the kind of core of TA's credibility in an org?
I think definitely having a service ethos. I think because I've come from an RPO background and worked in consultancy for a large part of my career, I very much see TA as providing a service, so a great experience to the hiring leaders and candidates. And so you really have to be able to put yourself in the shoes of your hiring manager and the candidates to understand what their motivations and their drivers are so that you can tailor your approach to their needs. And again, back to that point, you've got to be curious around that and ask the right questions and really take the time to understand what the needs are on either side, because you're almost like a broker trying to match that talent to the organisation. So I think that's really important. I think creativity is really important in a talent acquisition team, and some people think that's a big word or it's reserved for the arts. But you know, there are lots of challenges in talent acquisition. There are market dynamics, demand planning in businesses isn't always as strong as it could be. So you're reacting a lot. So you do need to be creative around your approach and try different things and keep going. And then I'd say the third thing is managing expectations with your stakeholders and being really clear in your communication. Because I feel like our job in talent acquisition is to be experts in the market and best practice talent acquisition, but really then provide the business with insight and options so that they can make informed choices. And that's where then I stand back and say, well, we've given you the insight, we've given you some options that are well thought through, we want to help you make that choice, but ultimately the business make that choice. And you've got to be prepared sometime to take a step back and say, well, that's the choice they've made. How do I support them, even if I don't agree with that choice, but help mitigate the risks? Or where can I influence that choice? But that's where I really see TA teams. They need to be curious, they need to be creative, and they need to be convincing with data to help influence the business. But ultimately, it's the business decision, particularly where I've worked around the ultimate hiring decision.
And it's like, disagree and commit. But like you say, it's how can we inform, how can we advise, how can we be the experts, but still provide scenarios. On that point of, I suppose, where's the blend? I think the risk with as a service is, do you become subservient? Like, how do you manage that part to make sure that it doesn't just become an administrative outfit that's administrative and advisory, but I think you could fall into the gap of service becoming subservient. How do you balance that?
Yeah, and I had a previous manager who used this phrase that we're in service to the business, not servitude to them, and that really resonated with me. Because at the end of the day, yes, we're there to provide a service, but that service, we need to be aligned on the agreed priorities for that service and what the expectations are and the clear roles and responsibilities, because hiring is a team sport. So there's things that we will do as part of that process and experience, and there's things that the business will need to do. And then if the goalposts shift considerably, which often happens and has happened in my career, you need to recontract then around what you're prepared to offer and what you need in return. And the business does the same, and then you marry the two up. But that's where you have to be strong in terms of influencing, communication, and not be afraid to push back on the business, but still partner with them and collaborate with them, but be honest and direct with them. There's nothing worse, I think, than agreeing to something when you know it's not going to work, going down a rabbit hole, and then things are going off course. And then it's 3-6 months later that all of these problems are starting to, arise or escalate. You need to take action up front. I think that's why the, role briefings and hiring manager briefings at the beginning of the process, they are so critical, because if you don't ask the right questions and influence there, you think about the downstream impact of that, not just, in terms of the recruitment process, but when we bring someone in that maybe doesn't fit the culture or isn't aligned to the long-term business needs.
And again, it's striking that balance, right? Because in that process where you are partnering, you're giving all of that information, you're understanding the brief, and then you're replaying back and saying, I don't think it's going to be possible. Like, I want to disagree with you here. We might want to work in this way. And then credibility could be lost because they say, well, prior to a TA function, I had this, agency that I'd use, or I'd just do it this way, etc. And I believe that I can still get this. So it needs to be robust. It needs to be sound. It needs to be well thought through if you're going to challenge back. And again, it's like that balance piece. And so what's the difference then, like, I suppose blending the two topics slightly, but what's the difference when we're thinking about playing back those, like a disagree and commit scenario in an organization that's a huge matrix organization where you may be looking after one business unit, one territory, or working on a project that impacts a small area, versus working a lot more directly with a senior leadership team of a smaller, kind of scale up business? How's that balance, do you find?
I think in a bigger business, there was definitely more consensus building. When you work in a partnership organisation, there are lots more individuals with skin in the game, with opinions around how talent acquisition should be managed and executed. So certainly, again, that's back to curiosity, getting to understand your stakeholders, what drives them, what's really at the root of their concerns, and then building consensus and also building relationships. I think as well, piloting things in different areas really supported me in a big organisation. So you could show, the proof of concept, and then you've got some stakeholders who are on board with you, they're bought in, and then they can help champion your initiatives or your approaches across the rest of the organisation. So I certainly had to do a lot more of that in a larger organisation, and potentially cross more of the T's and dot more of the I's, and really think through what would the end game be? And had we thought about everything as part of the solution, which is a good discipline to have in terms of looking at the risks, seeing the bigger picture, playing it through. That's not a skill set. I still use that in a smaller organisation, but I think I really developed that in a large, complex organisation with all those different opinions and different ways to do things, and then trying to build consensus and cohesion. Whereas maybe it's required less so in a smaller organisation, but some of the skills are still really good in terms of that relationship management and still doing MVPs. I'm a massive fan of that, so that you try things, you fail fast, you take the learnings and you move on. But that's not always easy, particularly for talent acquisition people. We're very customer oriented, we're target driven. We like to hit numbers. We're real problem solvers. So failure in that sort of environment where the pressure is on you and the business can't do what they need, it's growing or delivering a service because that hire's not in place, that's difficult. It's challenging to accept that failure, take the learnings and move on. But there's only one way you do it, is by experiencing it.
Yeah, and I think it's like, this, it's almost more pronounced in your scenario in both of your most recent roles, because you're working for consulting businesses that are going out externally and playing out scenarios and risks and impacts and timelines and variables. And it's basically the bread and butter of the organization that you're then replaying back in their same language, which is always a great way of doing it. But yeah, scrutiny levels are then higher if something is missed. So it almost adds an extra layer of pressure, right, when you are trying new things.
Yeah. And look, I've certainly learned the hard way in my career where you let that pressure overwhelm you, you take on too much, you push it down towards your team. That's a recipe for disaster across the board. So, certainly with experience and the more you understand yourself and your own fears or your own weaknesses or development areas, if you start to work on those, and you start to build your own confidence and you've got your own support and mentors and coaches, you can weather that scrutiny a bit better, or the change in demand or market dynamics that come in and suddenly scupper all of your plans. So I think certainly as a TA leader, you have to learn to build that resilience and confidence to be able to deal with those situations. And you're role modeling then that for your team. Because you can't ask your team to start pushing back on the business and presenting options and influencing them if you're not doing that yourself.
Yeah, and do you know what's happening here, Elaine? We're kind of 15 minutes in, and I'm realising just with your aura around you, I'm having a sort of coaching session as we're going through, because I was thinking about, what do I ask next and everything else, and as I'm going through it, but I'm actually replaying, I remember that failure. I should have been more resilient. Was there a moment where I kind of put that on the team a bit too much? Like, how should I be thinking about things? Maybe I should have built my mental network, sooner than I did.
Yeah.
But, I went off then. On my own tangent of my own memories. And I'm sure other people would as well as they're kind of listening, right? I think you do learn the most from your failures, and, you don't grow unless you're kind of taking chances and doing something different. But yeah, it's certainly more pronounced, I think, again, in your scenario. But in the inverse, for the types of organizations you're working within, the kind of talent that you're bringing in is directly impacting the organization's bottom line. And, I said at the start, we'll come to it in every, kind of episode as we're thinking through this. This is the biggest topic for talent acquisition, ahead of generative AI. Generative AI is the biggest thing in the world. This is the biggest thing in our space, arguably, which is, what's our commercial impact? How are we impacting the business? Yeah, I would love to kind of delve a bit deeper, not least on some of the much more tangible areas given the industries that you work in. But let's start actually, do you agree on like kind of how critical it is, that kind of connection between org and TA?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really critical because the reason we exist is to enable business performance and business growth. So you need to know the business drivers so you can align your recruitment strategies to that. So, understanding metrics like revenue growth or market share or employee productivity, knowing that means then we can hire the type of talent that the business needs. So, and in a way, I don't know any other way to do that. And it may be coming from an RPO background where there was slightly more pressure to justify being there, and there were KPIs and SLAs around the service that you were providing, and you were brought in for a reason. But I've taken that mindset with me into my in-house roles. So you're always going back to, well, what's the ROI on this? What's the impact? And constantly tailoring what you're doing to meet the business needs, which are ever changing. And in a services business, that can be quarter on quarter, month on month.
And I think the rigor of coming in from an RPO and justifying your existence within an organization, certainly as a vendor in a marketplace, we need to justify our existence and the continuation, probably to a higher level of scrutiny than an internal team member. But what it does allow you to do with that kind of RPO mindset, even if you're internal team, even if you're running a hybrid model, is essentially you're also justifying, hey, we need 300 extra hires. Well, cool, that doesn't come at no cost. If you're thinking about, you wouldn't be able to go to your master provider and just say, hey, we need another 300 hires and it's outside of the terms of the contract and we just need you to deliver them. There'd be a cost attached. So I love bringing that rigor in. What would be your advice to play back that kind of, I suppose, TA structure modeling back to the organization and, to get to this outcome, we're going to need X?
I think building agility into your talent acquisition operating model is key. And again, this comes from my RPO background and seeing what worked and didn't work. And I think organizations, the demand plan is going to change. It's really important to get as much information as you can around that. Try and influence it up front with talent insights around talent availability and where they're located. I think the phasing of the plan, locking that down every quarter is really important, and obviously knowing the skills that you're going after, but also being clear what are the critical skills that we will always be hiring for, because there's an element of being always on in the market and pipelining for that. But when it comes to your team structure, I think you should base your operating model based on a minimum threshold of hires that you think you're going to do on an ongoing basis. And you can use your trend data to build up what that would look like. And then anything above that, I think you need to have augmentation options. And it could be partnering with a talent marketplace like we do with HackaJob. It can be using preferred agency suppliers. I'm still a fan of partnerships with organisations because they all play a role in the talent acquisition strategy.
Quick disclaimer here, though, it doesn't mean everybody watching this podcast from an agency, to drop you a message, right now. But no, carry on.
Well, that's true because we've got targets around that. So the majority of work that we're going to do is directly source. But when you need to augment what you do, it's great to have partners who are there that you already have a pre-existing relationship with, whether it's an on-demand RPO solution where you have those relationships, you can augment quickly, but then when the demand disappears, you can bring your team size right down again. And that core team, it should have the expertise that you always need and the skills that you need. And you want an element of progression within that. But you're not growing your team to the extent that when there are these troughs, that you're then having to decrease your team and then you're losing all of that knowledge and insight of the business. So I'm a real fan of that model, having the core operating model, augmenting with partners, and of course making sure you've designed your process in a way which is consistent, but it's different or it's tailored by design, not just because, well, this is the way we've always done it. And of course technology plays a big role in automating those repetitive tasks so that you can scale through tech and not just through headcount. I think those are really important things to look at as part of your design.
Yeah, 100%. And look, the market kind of tells you that what you're saying is kind of validated, right? Because you've seen from RPOs maybe 8-9 years ago really started to play in the traditional RPOs, started to play into this project-based scenario. And it used to be a route into generating the big contract, right? They'd come in, they'd prove the model in a small part of the business, then they'd grow and get the big contract to take over the whole thing. But I don't think that ambition's there from RPOs anymore in the same way. It certainly still happens. But the ambition is far more on this kind of on-demand, flexible reputation. Can you get to a place where when there is a peak in hiring, you're the first number that they're calling in order to come and fix their challenge, and also bring a lot of that depth of knowledge and breadth of knowledge from the kind of sphere of clients that they're working with. And certainly from our 100 days, the most advanced organizations from a maturity perspective tend to be supported by RPOs at some level because of that latent knowledge. And like you say, you're then kind of protected from macroeconomic for your kind of core team. So yeah, totally get the model. And I think that's why we're going to continue to see the growth of on-demand RPOs and the framing from RPOs of what they want to achieve and the kind of projects which they want to win, right? So totally makes sense. And I think loads of great advice there on kind of the TA structure. And then what about the actual business outcomes, business results? Like, let's dive into that. Like, how do you see that playing in the most effective way back to the organization? Like, what's the start point and end point?
Well, look, it depends on where your organization's at. So, like in my experience, if I've gone to an organization the first year that was in real growth mode and it wants to grow in new locations where we might not have a brand presence. So you need to very quickly then understand, well, what is our brand presence in that location? What's the talent market like there? What are competitors doing? What is the best strategy now for us to pursue that will bring that talent in quickly, but without dropping our quality bar and linking that to our long-term business needs? So I think with any organisation that's coming in initially, understanding where they are in their journey, what the talent challenges are, and then tailoring your approach and solution to that. If you're not so much in growth mode, so this year we've returned to more normal hiring volumes, but if you've got some capacity on the bench and you might want to focus more on internal mobility and moving people around the organisation, you then need to tailor your approach to that. And all of these approaches need to be underpinned by metrics and how you link this to the bottom line of the business. So if I'm hiring more internal individuals, well, there's a cost to recruit externally versus internally. So how do you show the difference in the saving and the speed to productivity, for example, to an internal? And what's the impact on retention? Again, we're in a services business. So if I hire people in a new location to deliver a client win and have those people revenue generating sooner, there's a direct impact on the business bottom line there. And again, it's how do you show it? Now, I've worked in environments where I had very sophisticated data and metrics and reporting, and it was easy to do that. In a smaller organisation, if it's less evolved, you don't have all of those things to hand. Some of it might be manually generated, some of it might come through the system. The goal is to have it all through the system, but I think some people shy away from at least trying to articulate what the impact is that they're trying to have and pulling the metrics together, even if they're 80% there and there's some anecdotal stuff in there too. You need to start with something and play that back to the business and even get the business's support for you to get the analysis that you need. But I know you and I have spoken about this before. It's also stress testing those numbers with the business, because I might pat myself on the back for saving X and the business will say, well, that's cost avoidance. We don't care about that. We care about this instead. So you've got to test the water with them and you've got to agree what they care about and then find the best way to measure it. And I'm constantly talking to my team around what's the problem you're trying to solve here, what's the solution, and what's the impact that you want to have. It might be qualitative, it might be quantitative, but that has to be a mindset that goes right down to the coordinators in your team, who ours might be interview scheduling and think this is really manual, it's repetitive. If we did this, I could increase my productivity. You want to embed that mindset in your team, which is what I do on a daily basis. Do I have all the metrics and the reports easily at hand? No, but it's a mindset that you need to embed and then the rest will come. And of course, it's playing back the results and the impact that you're doing on a regular basis. I do that with the exec on a quarterly basis to let them know, what we said we were going to do, how we've progressed and what's coming next for us. And at the same time, sharing the insights on the market so that they're aware of what things might impact our talent pipeline in the future. So that's what I've done in this organisation. And I think really, again, back to the beginning, where is your business now? Asking the right questions, even choosing 2 or 3 metrics that are important to them and working on those and then scaling from there. Some people can get overwhelmed with the amount of data and insights, and I think you start small and then go from there.
Yeah, I think really sound advice. And also it goes right back to the start, right? It goes right back to the start of that original brief, that original consultation. And like, if you don't have time to do that effectively within your setup at the moment, then that's the piece which you need to free up. And whether that's automating through tech or whether that's dropping, service levels elsewhere, or whether that's, an impact somewhere else within the org, if you're not getting that first bit right, the rest of it can't follow. And then, I think the point on, almost like the 80% of the way there, plus some anecdotes. It's almost this kind of foundational versus auxiliary, which we've kind of spoken about before. It's like, what's the bit that we can absolutely hang our hat on and say that we've impacted? And then what are the parts which we can kind of point to that might be more qualitative, that might be more contributory, that are additional? And I think the layer that I'll probably add in is then, as you're starting to get that from one area of the business, are there other business objectives that you can kind of draw from other departments? And like you say, if you're kind of the feeling of this is going throughout the team and everybody's thinking about it. So, hey, your business partner in one area with your business partner in another area may suddenly come up with another part where you've saved or generated or impacted. And actually, how do you draw that out? How do you make that repeatable, insights as well? And then I think the other part, which is, really interesting, is then this like launching a new region, launching a new area, supporting a new client in a different way. Obviously, in the kind of org at the moment, the pressure is very much on talent acquisition, because without people, you're unable to deliver it. But what about drawing on previous experiences, like launching a new geo, launching a new product? How have you thought about tying that outcome, that delivery, back to, I suppose, the business and TA's role within that?
Again, you might have a traditional way of recruiting in the business, the normal skills in the normal locations, and you might think, well, that works and that you can just lift and shift that to another location. But what I've found is that you often can't. And it's almost like taking some of that stuff, but starting from scratch. And as I said earlier, it's about being curious around, well, what is that location? What are competitors doing there? What's the availability of talent there? And then how do you tailor your approach to that? I'm lucky in my roles. I've always had permanent hiring as well as contract and partner hiring and internal mobility. So I think if you really look at whatever the business need is in that location, looking at all of those different hire types and looking broader around, well, what does the solution need to be? Is it temporarily some contractor so we can get up and running? Is it moving some individuals from this part of the business to that new location? You're bringing that existing knowledge and insight and that cultural fit. And then how do you augment that with permanent hires? And some of those I've also got early careers under my remit. So I think talent acquisition's impact can be really, can be broader and more commercial if they actually have all of those different hire types under their remit, and they can join the dots between the two of them and advise the business accordingly. So you're moving not just from acquisition into more of a talent management mindset and approach. And so where I've done that before in new locations, it's been a combination of internal people, contractors, partners, external hires, and pulling that all together to deliver the business need as a holistic, multifaceted solution.
And I think that's kind of the nirvana state for many talent acquisition leaders who are maybe looking after a segment of that or have responsibility for a segment of that. But I think that's really where you can get to the place where actually you're saying back to the business, okay, cool, we've got to deliver on X project. These are the skills that we're going to need in order to do that. And we may build, buy, borrow, bot, across those. And here's the different ways in which we can do it. These are the cost implications of each one. These are the business implications of each one, and of course this is all forecasted. Still needs to be delivered against, but at least it gives that kind of semblance of true advisory. When you're kind of entering into those, so definitely nirvana point. And I think what would be if you've got a smaller remit, smaller focus, what can often be the case, and I've had a couple of conversations to a similar tune this week of, and it's only Tuesday as we're recording this, but I've had a couple of conversations already this week where it's, hey, we've had 300 new hires added or 70 new hires added. They're connected to X project and they need to be delivered yesterday, right? That old adage in talent acquisition. What would be your advice for kind of breaking that cycle and moving from administrative to more strategic? Maybe not the endpoint nirvana, but like step gates in between those.
Well, I would say, if you're a lone recruiter in a new location where you don't have the big team and you don't have all of those hire types under your remit, I think certainly being very clear around, if you're going into a new location, why would I join this organisation? What is the proposition that you're selling to candidates? Getting that really clear and articulating that, and then using the business as advocates to get that message out into the market. That means already you've started to sort of 10x your reach in terms of why you're coming into that market, what clients you're working with, what's the benefit in joining the organisation. So I'd probably start there if you were smaller and you didn't have that much sort of resources at your disposal. I'd still look at partners in the location because they might already know the market there. They might have talent pools already, and that could be a talent marketplace solution. It could be an RPO that you partner with just to augment temporarily. I think having a really clear process when you're hiring these people in the region or the new location and being really clear, it's 3 steps and who's involved, and booking that time in advance in their diaries and communicating that to candidates and managing expectations. I think you can go a long way once you get people interested, engaged. You can really differentiate yourself with a great experience. And that doesn't mean that you have to have a lot of sophistication in your process or your technology. I think actually people will tolerate maybe a long form or, even if it's a 4-stage process, as long as their expectations are managed and the experience is good and they feel like they're treated like a human being. So again, if I was in a smaller organisation, those are the things that I would hone in on, because there's that sort of quote, people remember how you make them feel, not what you do. And again, then if those individuals aren't right, they'll still talk to other people about the experience, and then that has a ripple effect on your brand in the region. And as I said earlier, choose a couple of metrics that might be really important. It could be the fulfillment of the plan. It could be, around the candidate experience. And you can ask people for that anecdotally. But I would start small and focus on defining the process, getting the brand out there, and your proposition clear and managing expectations really well.
And I think its first impressions count as well was something which I draw out of that. And particularly when you're launching in a new region, you might have a limited talent pool of individuals, and they're going to be far better networked with each other than they are with you. And so, candidate experience always being king. It's even more pronounced when you're thinking about new region, new setup, etc. So I think that's one great point to draw out, and lots of really practical advice. The other part is partners, right? I remember years ago now, over a decade ago, we used to run speed dating, speed meeting events, and we'd run an ATS event. And you'd meet 10 ATSs in a row, and people would go, I don't want to meet with vendors. They'd have like a little bit of an allergic reaction to having a sequence of meetings. But the reality is, if you were still running your, kind of talent acquisition data through a spreadsheet, this was before the days of GDPR and the other issues that might come with it. Like practically, you weren't going to be able to grow and replay back the data and show that impact, and you weren't able to benefit from, the knowledge and resource that a vendor partner can provide. And I think if you select the right partners, whatever vertical they're in, they've got a lot of information that they want to give you. They want you to be successful by and large, and they're going to be able to help support. And I think so much more important when you think about building into a new territory or diving into a new area that you've not delivered in before, is like, let's take some people that have already walked the track multiple times and leverage and benefit from their impact, right?
Yeah. There was the big swing in talent acquisition from agency to direct, and I think that was great in some regards because it built that capability in-house. But my job is to find, and you've heard this before, the right talent at the right time in the right location for the business, regardless of where that comes from. So I am a massive fan of a blended model, but doing it by design, so using your team in the right way where they will excel, and then engaging with partners where you have gaps or short-term peaks in demand or areas of expertise that actually they can do better than you. I think sometimes in talent acquisition, there's this perception that you've got to do everything yourself and it has to be direct and you're better than them and you have to fill all of these roles. And we probably instilled that mindset a little bit by focusing so much sometimes on cost. But that's the challenge in talent acquisition. You've got to deliver a great service, protect the brand. You've got to focus on quality. You've got to look at speed. You've got to look at cost as well. You've got to manage all of those commercial drivers when you're in that role. And if you focus or over-index on one, you pay a penalty for that on the others. So it's how do you strike that balance? And also then meet the business where they are, because at some point, some of those metrics might be more important than others, but you've still got to focus on all of them. I haven't worked in an organisation where at some point all of those weren't important.
It's like, core tenets of recruiting and talent acquisition almost, right? And I think the last part there almost ties back wonderfully to the start of the thread. It's that kind of, that RPO mindset in a way of thinking about how you deliver, because ultimately that's a service, right? You need to get to the outcome. It needs to be the right people, right place, right time. And ultimately that's not always done by every single recruiter that's working directly for the RPO. God, do they use agencies? Absolutely. Will they use different providers? Absolutely, to get them to that end result. The second that client satisfaction is dropping, or an SLA or a KPI is not being met. So I think powerful and tons of great takeaways for kind of aspiring leaders from an inspirational one. Final question, Elaine: what are you reading? What are you watching? How do you keep your knowledge current? And don't say this podcast outside of this.
Look, I read a lot on, I follow a lot of people on LinkedIn. I obviously read a lot from Josh Berthoud because I think he provides some really interesting insights around talent acquisition and linking it to the broader people agenda. It's no surprise I read a lot on leadership and coaching myself to become a better leader, because ultimately it makes me better at my job. I'm also reading a book at the moment called Playing Big by Tara Moore, which is really talking about women in the workplace and how they find their own voice and go internally more for the answers. Not that external mentors and things aren't good, but really trying to tap into that inner wisdom that's inside them and stop second guessing themselves so much or over preparing for things. And that's certainly the learnings I've taken from that I use in my business, but also with a lot of people that I work with, particularly the women, but other individuals as well, just to grow in confidence and believe in their expertise. because ultimately then they can influence the business, they can influence those hiring outcomes, they'll innovate more, they'll take more risks. But I really do, success a lot of the time is an inside job, and if you get that right, the rest of it will come together. And yes, you do need to be able to navigate change and respond to it, because it's the new normal or the next normal. It's constant. So being able to ride the waves, I suppose, is a real skill to develop in talent acquisition.
A wonderful way to finish. An absolute pleasure to have you on the show, Elaine, and I'll see you very soon.
Thank you, Sam.